At exactly 7:47 a.m. Eastern Time today, right on the heels of explosive leaks in major US papers showing President Trump completely dismissed warnings about Mark Carney's mastery of economic warfare, the geopolitical landscape shifted forever. While Washington was still scrambling for damage control, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped up to a podium in Ottawa, but he wasn't alone. Standing shoulder to shoulder with him were the heads of state from the UK, France, Germany, and Japan, and what they announced next sent shockwaves across the globe. Watched live by over 1.5 billion people around the world, Carney and the leaders of these economic powerhouses unveiled what they dubbed the Sovereign Democratic Alliance, or SDA. This is a binding, permanent coalition engineered to shield member nations against economic blackmail, political meddling, and any external threats to their sovereignty. But the real bombshell? Carney revealed this pact wasn't just formed today. According to the Prime Minister, the SDA has been operating in the shadows since January 15, 2026, almost 2 full months before Trump slapped tariffs on Canada. This coalition was secretly assembled based on intelligence forecasting that the Trump administration was preparing aggressive economic strikes against longtime allies. So, for the last 8 weeks, while Donald Trump was convinced he was backing Canada into a corner one-on-one, he was actually up against a highly coordinated 5-nation juggernaut. We are talking about a bloc boasting 3 nuclear arsenals, 4 G7 economies, and a staggering combined GDP of over $25 trillion. Every single strategic move Canada made during this crisis, from invoking Article 5, to launching the Democratic Trade Alliance, to rolling out massive infrastructure investments, was meticulously planned with SDA partners well in advance. Trump wasn't just taking on Ottawa. He was simultaneously at war with London, Paris, Berlin, and Tokyo, and he had absolutely no clue. With this morning's unprecedented reveal of a 2-month-old covert alliance, the reality set in. Trump had lost this economic war before the first shot was even fired. The opposition had already forged an unbreakable shield while the US operated on the false assumption that Canada was isolated. Now that the secret is out, American intelligence agencies are under fire for completely missing it, with experts calling this the most catastrophic blind spot since Pearl Harbor. In this video, I will break down exactly how the Sovereign Democratic Alliance was built under the radar and why US spy agencies were left entirely in the dark. I will map out the specific tactics the SDA utilized to coordinate their crisis response, outline the new structure of this now public alliance, and explain exactly why these global powers felt cornered into creating a defense pact against America. Finally, I will walk you through 3 distinct scenarios for the future of global security now that top democracies have a permanent shield against US pressure. Hit that subscribe button to join our community, and share this video if you find this breakdown valuable. Let's dive into Prime Minister Carney's opening remarks from the press briefing, because the details of this alliance's creation expose a level of sophisticated planning that completely slipped past American radar. Carney stated on January 15, 2026, "I convened a secure video call with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Our focus was on credible intelligence suggesting the incoming US administration was preparing to target its own allies with aggressive economic and political weapons, risking trade violations and severe economic coercion. Driven by these warnings, the leaders established a mutual defense framework, the Sovereign Democratic Alliance. The core directive was straightforward. Should any member state endure economic bullying, political tampering, or threats to their sovereignty from an outside force, the entire bloc would unite to retaliate and protect them. They agreed to keep the pact highly classified, holding on to the hope that it would never actually need to be triggered. They desperately wanted to believe their intel was wrong and that Washington would continue to honor allied relationships. But on February 1, 2026, when the United States leveled unlawful tariffs against Canada, directly violating the USMCA, the SDA was officially activated. From that precise moment, every significant countermeasure from Canada was synchronized with its SDA allies. When Ottawa invoked NATO Article 5, it did so only after consulting the UK, France, and Germany. When the Democratic Trade Alliance was born, Britain, France, Germany, and Japan stood as founding pillars, actively recruiting others. When billion-dollar infrastructure projects were announced, those 4 nations provided the heaviest financial backing. And when Canada triggered Article 21 of the GATT, top legal minds from all 5 nations crafted the strategy together. The United States was never just battling Canada. It was waging a trade war against a unified democratic front with a massive $25 trillion economy, a combined population of 450 million citizens, and top-tier military might. The harsh truth behind America's repeated strategic losses in this crisis is simple. The US was hopelessly outnumbered and systematically outplayed from day one. Carney then yielded the floor so each leader could detail their nation's specific contributions. Prime Minister Keir Starmer took the mick first, explaining that the UK entered the STA because they viewed the erratic policy shifts of the Trump administration as a severe risk not just to Canada, but to all democracies relying on a rules-based global order to fulfill their STA duties. The UK fed crucial intelligence to Canada, synced up their NATO maneuverings, and injected $18 billion into Canadian infrastructure. Starmer noted that while the US-UK special relationship remains vital, Britain refuses to look the other way when America bullies fellow democracies. Make sure you are subscribed, because in a moment I am going to reveal the exact intelligence that sparked this DA's creation before Trump even moved on Canada. Next up was French President Emmanuel Macron. He revealed that Paris had been doubting American reliability since Trump's initial term. Upon his return to the White House, French intelligence flagged a high probability that Trump would revert to his old playbook of strong-arming allies. By December 2025, French spies intercepted chatter that Trump was eyeing tariffs on Canada and potentially Europe next. France reached out to Ottawa, proposing a unified defense front, which ultimately birthed the STA. France's primary duty within the alliance was financial fortification. Leveraging the European Central Bank and direct bilateral channels, Paris ensured Canada's currency maneuvers held strong and their financial markets weathered the US storm. France also spearheaded the integration of all 27 EU member states into the Democratic Trade Alliance. The STA functioned so flawlessly because of a strict division of labor. Canada took the public spotlight, the UK handled intelligence, France managed the money, Germany organized the economic shift, and Japan anchored the Asian-Pacific front. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz was the third to speak. He declared that Germany committed to the STA out of a deep belief that democratic nations must stand united against authoritarian tactics, even if those tactics are deployed by a democratic superpower. Germany's role was heavily economic. Directed by Berlin, German corporations rapidly signed massive procurement contracts to replace Canada's lost American buyers. German banks extended vital credit lines to Canadian enterprises, while their engineering titans poured resources into the $25 billion trade corridor. The ultimate objective was to guarantee Canada could endure a prolonged economic standoff with America without collapsing. Finally, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida addressed the room. He acknowledged Japan's heavy reliance on American security pacts, but bluntly stated that a guarantee is worthless if the guarantor is unreliable. Watching Washington aggressively target Canada proved that unreliability. Tokyo joined the STA as an insurance policy, guaranteeing that if America ever turned its crosshairs on Japanese trade, they wouldn't have to face it alone. Japan's main deliverable was locking down Asian support for the Democratic Trade Alliance and pivoting to purchase Canadian energy exports over American ones. Tokyo also fed critical intelligence regarding US military and economic maneuvers, allowing Canada to stay one step ahead. During the ensuing Q&A, the press demanded to know why the alliance was hidden for 2 months. Carney didn't flinch. "We kept it classified to prevent unnecessary escalation," he explained. "If they had gone public in January, it likely would have triggered an even more explosive immediate reaction from President Trump. Secrecy preserved their tactical edge. The US made all its strategic choices believing it was engaged in a one-on-one fight. Because that foundational assumption was totally false, every resulting American decision backfired. The element of surprise was their greatest weapon. When reporters asked if the STA would dissolve now that the US-Canada tensions were cooling, Starmer was unequivocal. "The STA is here to stay. They have ratified a legally binding treaty featuring mutual defense clauses heavily inspired by NATO's Article 5, but custom-built for economic and political warfare. If any member is targeted by economic coercion, the rest are treaty-bound to intervene collectively." With all 5 parliaments having officially ratified it, the STA is now cemented into the bedrock of global security. As for expansion, Macron confirmed the door is wide open. They anticipate other sovereign democracies vulnerable too. Superpower coercion will want in, expecting the roster to swell to 10 or 15 nations by next year. And when pressed if this coalition was explicitly anti-American, Chancellor Scholz pushed back. He framed it as strictly pro-sovereignty. He stressed that as long as the United States abides by international law, the STA and America will have zero friction. But if any nation attempts to trample a member's sovereignty, the alliance will strike back as one. Meanwhile, back in Washington, absolute chaos was unfolding. At 8:30 a.m., the Director of National Intelligence summoned every U.S. agency head for a crisis briefing. Insiders report the DNI was demanding answers on how 4 of America's tightest allies managed to build a subterranean 5-nation pact for 2 months without triggering a single alarm bell. The answers exposed an intelligence failure of catastrophic proportions. The CIA admitted it lacked any human informants close to this DA's inner circle. The NSA confessed they were completely locked out. The Allied leaders exclusively used quantum-encrypted channels and personal devices impervious to American wiretaps. The Defense Intelligence Agency realized that military data was being swapped through covert channels, deliberately avoiding standard networks monitored by the U.S. The grim consensus in the room was that the STA stayed hidden because it was reverse-engineered to defeat American surveillance. One anonymous intelligence official summed up the disaster perfectly. They built a coalition under the assumption we would be hunting for it, and designed it to be totally invisible. We lost because they beat our intelligence apparatus before we even realized. We were on the board. By 9:00 a.m., the Pentagon was rushing to calculate the strategic nightmare this posed. Military brass were reportedly deeply disturbed. First, the UK, France, and Japan are heavily integrated US treaty allies. This new pact introduces parallel allegiances that directly clash with existing US agreements. Second, the STA essentially pools the resources of 3 nuclear states. Finally, the Mutual Defense Clause guarantees that any U.S. pressure immediately sparks a 5 versus 1 economic war, a scenario America mathematically cannot win without resorting to actual kinetic military force. At 9:30 a.m., the bombshell was dropped on President Trump's desk. Sources say his initial disbelief quickly morphed into sheer fury. He was reportedly screaming, asking how the nation with the greatest spy network on Earth was completely blindsided when briefed that the alliance utilized quantum encryption to evade detection. Trump allegedly demanded they make quantum encryption illegal immediately. His aides then had the impossible task of explaining that US law doesn't dictate foreign technology. At 10:00 a.m., the White House released an incredibly tense official statement. It labeled the STA a defiant coalition formed by nations actively undermining American leadership instead of operating within established bounds like NATO. Washington condemned the pact as a hostile, destabilizing act by supposed friends, demanding its immediate dissolution. 30 minutes later, Capitol Hill erupted. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer released a scathing rebuttal, stating that 4 of America's most vital allies feeling forced to build a secret bunker to hide from the U.S. is the ultimate indictment of Trump's foreign policy. They didn't trust us. They were terrified of us, Schumer said, and they were entirely justified because the president attacked Canada exactly as their intelligence warned. We shouldn't be asking why they built this in secret. We should be asking why they felt they needed protection from the United States in the first place. At 11:00 a.m., NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte attempted to do damage control, issuing a statement to assure the world that NATO and the STA could coexist. He argued that since NATO handles military defense and the STA manages economic warfare, they aren't mutually exclusive. However, he warned that nations holding dual memberships must meticulously navigate their treaty obligations. By midday, geopolitical analysts were flooding the airwaves, heavily agreeing that this is the most radical shift in democratic alliances since NATO was born 75 years ago. For over 7 decades, the free world's security relied entirely on Washington. The STA flips that dynamic, creating an alternative power center built entirely around resisting coercion. It offers middle-tier nations a viable way to stand up to heavyweights. The STA provides a powerful fourth option: hit the panic button and summon the combined might of 4 massive economies to absorb the blow. It changes the entire math of global diplomacy. Looking ahead, experts see 3 potential paths for this STA's impact. Scenario 1 is a contained expansion. The alliance brings in nations like Australia, New Zealand, and the Nordics, capping around 12 members. It functions strictly as a sleeper shield, waking up only when explicitly provoked, eventually forcing the US to play nice. Scenario 2 is a massive competitive expansion. The STA quickly absorbs 25 to 30 countries, essentially swallowing the entire Democratic Trade Alliance to form an unstoppable mega-bloc controlling 60% of the world's wealth. The globe fractures into 3 distinct empires: a shrinking US coalition, the massive STA bloc, and the Chinese sphere of influence. Scenario 3 is a global alliance cascade. The STA proves so successful that it triggers copycat coalitions worldwide. Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa all form their own regional anti-coercion pacts. Within a few years, superpowers lose the ability to bully anyone, resulting in a deeply fragmented multipolar globe. Moving forward, the critical metrics to watch are which nations submit STA applications, how NATO officially integrates with this new bloc, and if Washington attempts any retaliation. The cloak has been lifted. 5 powerhouse nations have united to check American dominance. Just weeks ago, Donald Trump thought he was fighting a lone neighbor, completely unaware he was shadowboxing a global coalition. Now the world knows that the ultimate defense mechanism against US pressure is fully operational. The STA is out in the open, it is bound by law, and the golden era of unchecked American influence over the democratic world has officially come to an end.